Hello and welcome to Foreign Policy Focus. This is episode 139 and I am the show's host, Kyle. Foreign Policy Focus is the podcast where I discuss current events related to foreign policy and international news and then get some analysis on those events. If you'd like to share the show, help the show to grow and more people to hear this very important news and analysis, foreignpolicyfocus.libsyn.com, thelibertarianinstitute.org, or the Facebook page, The Libertarian Union. And like I said, taking the time to share the show helps the show to grow, and I really appreciate it. And today I think I have some good things to talk about, so for those of you who feel kind of depressed when you listen and want to hear something, some positive news, I'll certainly have that in today's show. So let's start off where the positive news is, and that's with North Korea. To kind of follow the current story, let's trap back to New Year's Eve when Kim Jong-un gave his speech to his people and incidentally to the world as well. Anytime Trump gives a speech, he knows the leaders of all the other countries are listening and they also have to react and listen to what the speech is saying. The most important thing that Kim Jong-un said in his speech is that he wanted to extend a hand to the South Koreans to see if the North Koreans could possibly send some athletes to the Winter Games that will be held in South Korea in February. Now, North Korea did not suggest in any way that the United States would be involved in these talks, and they seem to want to focus on just the Olympic issue. In that speech, Kim Jong-un made a comment also, something along the lines that has been translated into, I have a nuclear button on my desk. So, I think what, has presented itself to the American people by the American media is that Kim Jong-un is sitting there with a big red button on his desk and just sits there all day long thinking about pressing it. I'm pretty sure that's not the case and that this statement Kim Jong-un was making is basically just saying North Korea now has a nuclear deterrent. That if North Korea is attacked, North Korea has the ability to shoot back at the United States or United States allies, South Korea, Japan, etc. There's a couple things I want to say about the statement in general. One is that obviously Kim Jong-un does not have a big red button sitting on his desk, and if he pushes it, several nuclear missiles will launch at different targets around the world. I'm sure that Kim Jong-un is set up with a situation like Donald Trump where there's a guy who follows him around and he has whatever secure communications device they need to launch, to order the launch of the nuclear weapons. And then there's a multi-step process down the line where, the commander of the nuclear weapons will have to, tell his troops to turn the keys or however they do it. Now, in the United States of America, we have what's called the nuclear triad. We have the B-52 bombers or B-1B bombers. The B-52s right now are on 24-hour alert, fueled up and ready to go bomb North Korea should Trump order it. We have the nuclear submarines that are always prowling around with nuclear weapons, missiles with nuclear warheads on them, able to hit targets, wherever we want. In North Korea, I'm sure has no ability to detect where these submarines are, especially if they're anywhere immediately off the, not right off the coast of North Korea. And then we have land-based ICBM Minuteman II missiles that are mostly in the more rural parts of the United States. And the point of these missiles is, one, to be a nuclear sponge should, a country like China or Russia ever launch weapons against the United States. That in order to take out all the nuclear missile silos ladled across kind of the area of the Rockies, the Great Plains, and the Midwest, it'll cost them a large number of their nuclear weapons. And so at the very least, these missiles serve the purpose of being a sponge and absorbing strikes away maybe from the United States population centers, Los Angeles, the East Coast, Chicago. Anyways, in all of these cases, the missiles are always loaded up and ready to go. And if Trump pushes a button, minutes or maybe a low number, 1 or 2 hours before missiles are exploding in North Korea. In North Korea, it's a little bit different. North Korea doesn't have a massive air force, and I don't know if they actually have bombers, but certainly nobody really fears a North Korean bomber dropping a nuclear weapon on anyone. I think everybody knows that, to launch the bomber, it'd be, a complicated process, and that'd be shot down relatively quickly. The United States and South Korea and Japan have hundreds of U.S.-made planes ready to go down that area. The other, kind of threat, North Korea, maybe they load a nuclear weapon on a submarine, although they don't necessarily have the missile capabilities to launch a missile from a submarine with a nuclear tip and hit maybe a U.S. city or a South Korean or Japanese city. And so this would make delivering this kind of nuclear weapon very difficult because I'm sure these places have a lot of radar around their waters and will be able to detect a North Korean submarine, because I guess it would have to be a suicide more type mission where they get the thing as close to land as possible and then detonate the nuclear weapon. And then, the main way that they pretend that North Korea weapons could reach the United States is through a land-based missile launch. However, this would take hours to complete. The North Koreans don't have missile silos set up at all times with their ICBM missiles and tipped with their nuclear weapons. I'm sure they keep most, if not all, these parts separately. North Korea has relatively few missile launchers. They're all mobile. Essentially what they have is these just massive trucks with I think 12 to 16 axles, and they could load up the ICBMs on them and then they can move around and set up and launch. But this process takes hours. And so I guess I just wanted to give the idea that there isn't a big red button Kim Jong-un could push in minutes later. Tokyo is nuclear waste. I also would just like to highlight probably what happened here, and that is Kim Jong-un talks about the button to flex North Korea's nuclear deterrent. Obviously, Kim Jong-un is giving this message to the entire world, and I'm guessing that whenever you're trying to give a message like that to people in so many different languages, it's hard to have a lot of nuance in it. And so while this is a pretty ham-handed comment, I'm guessing that's how it was going to be translated, no matter how nuanced what Kim Jong-un was trying to say is. Now, why would North Korea want to flex their nuclear deterrent? Well, North Korea is most threatened by the United States, and this is well known by everybody. Nobody in the United States isn't gonna, even U.S. government isn't going to not admit this. Now, if you look at United States foreign policy stretching back to World War II, there's a pretty clear line that the United States will invade states where there's not nuclear weapons, but if a state has a nuclear weapon, you're probably not going to get invaded by the United States. The best two examples of this are Libya and Iraq, where both of those countries decided to give up their nuclear weapons or weapons of mass destruction programs, and then were later invaded by the United States anyways. Even if you look at the treatment of a non-nuclear state versus a nuclear state, maybe India and Iran would be good examples. Iran is, pushed around by the United States pretty fiercely and has had to agree to give up a large portion of its civilian nuclear energy capabilities in order just to get trade with Europe. Where India, on the other hand, is a country that is not within the Non-Proliferation Treaty, who still does business with the United States and carries much more weight on an international stage than does Iran, and the United States isn't constantly threatening to attack India and doesn't treat India like they do Iran. The one exception maybe you could make is Pakistan, although the Pakistan government is kind of U.S. allies. U.S. drone bombs do fall in Pakistan, but usually they hit targets that the Pakistan government is willing to let be bombed. So anyway, cycling back to the actual story now, we have South Korea responding favorably to the North Korean statements, and they say, hey, let's have some border talks. I guess North Korea then decided to open the border channel of communications with South Korea again, and South Korea offered North Korea to have face-to-face talks, with which North Korea accepted this morning. Now, I think the most important thing to rewind a little bit, in between when South Korea offered the talks and when North Korea accepted, President Moon of South Korea and President Trump had a conversation where they talked about what would happen during the Olympic Games. And in that conversation, I guess Trump agreed with Moon that they would halt all war games going on during the Winter Games. Now, I'm not surprised this was happening. I'm surprised they had war games scheduled at this time anyways. You would think that would be something the Olympic Committee would have had a problem with. Also, several world leaders and delegations attend these events. There's people from all different countries. I'm guessing that the Russians and the Chinese and the Iranians, well, I don't know if Russians will be there, but the Chinese and the Indians and the Iranians may have some issues if the United States is conducting massive war games while the Olympic Games are going. Anywho, that happened before the North Koreans then accepted face-to-face talks with the South Koreans. The face-to-face talks will occur on January 9th, so only a couple days from now. I was surprised at how fast this is developing. The talks will occur in a village within the DMZ, and it will be on the South Korean side of the village. The thing is that the Korean Peninsula was really never two countries until after the Korean War, when it was split by the, kind of the United States, armistice with North Korea. I think there's a lot of people who still believe in a united Korean Peninsula, and while that, seems impossible and kind of a predetermined destiny that there's always going to be a North and South Korea today, there are a lot of people who still have relatives on both sides of the border, and I'm sure would love if, they could start to go visit relatives, etc. The goals of these talks will be for, to find a way to send the athletes to the games and to improve general relations. Want to talk, about why I see this as such positive news, and one is all occurring without the United States. This means that, I guess, to some extent, and maybe it's just because right now there's the cover of the Olympic Games and there's the weighted perception that the Olympic Games are, supposed to be positive, coming together type events. However, the South Koreans have been able to go this without the United States. They have not sought Trump's permission, at least not publicly, to hold these talks. It seems to me that it's going on all without the United States, and in some sense, in spite of what the United States has wanted. Trump has forced Rex Tillerson to walk back all of his comments saying that the United States would engage in talks with the North Koreans prior to the North Koreans agreeing to give up all their nuclear weapons. So it seems pretty obvious that the South Koreans are going this alone, and that the South Koreans are moving towards peace with the North Koreans is a good thing. I think this could really undermine what the United States is trying to do here. If the South Koreans are able to make some kind of peace deal with the North Koreans, well, this creates a large problem for politicians in the United States who try to push the war with North Korea. If our allies in South Korea are not threatened by the North Koreans anymore, then it becomes hard for the United States to justify spending millions of billions of dollars to keep all of our aircraft carriers and conduct all these war games and spend all this money in Korea. I think from the side of the North Koreans, this may actually mean that they've looked and achieved a nuclear deterrent, or believe they have done so. I think there's a lot of questions out there about the North Koreans' actual nuclear capabilities. I have no idea if they could load a hydrogen bomb on the tip of a ICBM and actually hit the United States. I really, really doubt it, that would actually happen. My guess would be that if North Korea has some very small regular nuclear weapons that they could either maybe deliver by boat, truck, or some sort of submarine device and, hit off the coast of Japan or Korea and probably not get all that close to the coast there. And, that their real deterrence would be the artillery they have pointed at Seoul and the 30 million people, including well over 100,000 Americans that live in that region. But it does seem that maybe the North Koreans are kind of content with the deterrent that they now have, that they feel that they have the ability to deliver enough of a punch that nobody's gonna, take a chance and, carry out a sucker punch against them. So they're feeling pretty good. I guess, like if you're a guy at a bar and you got, you're a big enough guy with enough muscles, you feel like nobody's gonna, take a cheap shot at you, and maybe the North Koreans feel that way. I also want to say, in the past, I'm not a huge fan of the Olympic Games. It seems to me that if you look at what the, kind of Olympic Games have as an effect on the local population, it seems to rob them of their wealth. So some, rich people from other countries could come and do drugs, and sex trafficking goes on a lot at the games. And there's a lot of terrible things about it. So, well, while I haven't always been a huge fan of the Olympic Games in the past, if they're able to provide any sort of resolution to what's going on in the Korean Peninsula, that would be just a huge and awesome thing. So everybody, listening to the show, let's support this. Try your best, if you're on Facebook or Twitter, try to share the stories that talk about the positive things going on in the Korean Peninsula, and not about Trump and Kim Jong-un's, kind of dumbass bolstering and nuclear arms waving in the air. Other news that seems, I guess, to be decent, and that is the protests are cooling off in Iran. I only say that that's good news is because I was really worried that the neoconservatives in the United States were going to try to seize on an opportunity to get Trump to provide some sort of support to the Iranian protesters. Now, I don't want to discourage any Iranians who are looking for a more liberal, liberal in the sense of free country, from doing that, but at the same time to look at the situation and look like what would probably happen. Maybe we have a replication of what happened in Syria, where there was some legitimate protesting against the Assad regime, people hoping to live freer lives, but the revolution ended up being co-opted by extremists, and because of that, Syria has been in the middle of a absolutely brutal 6 years, going on 7-year civil war that's maybe killed 500,000. Some people are suggesting that maybe the legitimate parts of the protesting are cooling off because of the rioting parts of the protesting. I guess there's probably a couple reasons for this, and that is if you're out protesting and then the guy next to you throws a Molotov cocktail at the police, in a country like Iran, not that this is any sort of justice, I think you're probably pretty likely to be shot. Kind of the guy next to you type of thing. And this could happen in the United States of America as well, right? I'm not trying to just condemn the Iranian. European leaders, especially Macron and France, kind of leading the charge here, are expressing that they don't want to rush into anything in Iran, that whatever's going on in Iran, kind of let it go on in Iran. Hopefully they'll work it out. Hopefully they won't kill too many protesters or anything like that. But honestly, it's not our business, and we just want to trade with the Iranians. The Russians have asked the international community to stay out of it as well. The Americans obviously didn't get the message. Right now we have, I think, a UN Security Council meeting going on this morning on the Iranian protests, which seems silly because, like I said, they're fizzling out now. And so I'm not quite sure what a UN Security Council meeting would even achieve at this point, since there's not going to be much protesting left if they do anything. But again, this seems like the neoconservatives, liberal interventionists in America trying to take advantage to attack Iran. I will say I did read a story that I think the most positive thing that could happen right now between Iran and the West is for the Iranians to start doing heavy business with the Europeans. Not only will it probably benefit the economy within Iran and maybe quell some of these economic protesters who are feeling like there's a lot of inflation right now in Iran, but it will also create a large incentive for Europeans to not want to put sanctions back on the Iranians. Coming up in about 7 days, we'll have the Trump administration having to waiver some of the sanctions that Obama gave a waiver to against or along with the Iran nuclear deal. So if these sanctions go back on Iran, then the United States would not be in compliance with the nuclear deal. And so, will Iran then start violating a nuclear deal? The hope is that the Europeans would stay within the deal and the Iranians would stay within the deal because the Europeans are. So I don't think I gave the number, but about $3 billion in trade between Iran and Germany in the first 3 quarters of 2007. That being said, so we get this UN Security Council meeting for what's going on in Iran. But the protests in Honduras were much more severe. The government was backed by the United States. The military, the paramilitary that was going out and suppressing the protesters were trained by the United States. 31 people died in those protests, which I believe is probably more than protesters killed in Iran at this point. I think the death toll is close to 30 in Iran, but several of those, maybe up to 10, are actually government officials. So 31 protesters killed in Honduras over the protesting there. And, there's not this demand by the United States to hold the Honduran government accountable. We're not trying to withdraw our support for the Honduran government. We just kind of stay the course. And so this is obviously political. There's not a single U.S. official. Well, there might be some, but in general, the U.S. officials out there saying that, we need sanctions on Iran or we need to support the protesters. Don't really care about the protesters. For them, this is just all about the geopolitics and wanting to control the Middle East and hate having even one country outside the direct orbit of the United States in the middle. Also, a pretty good story by Matt Purple that ran in the American Conservative about how putting sanctions on Iran isn't going to help the people. It isn't going to help U.S. interests in Iran either. If the people are protesting in Iran because of the harsh economic conditions, and then the U.S. puts economic sanctions on Iran, this is going to give the regime in Iran an excuse to blame the poor economic conditions on the United States, and to some extent rightfully so, because the United States will in part be responsible for the poor economic conditions in Iran. That's the point of the economic sanctions, is to create a worse economic situation. So, the United States should do nothing right here. If the people of Iran are able to start hopefully a peaceful, but, if they want to have their own kind of revolution, that's fine. Just the United States doesn't need to be involved. Read an interesting Wall Street Journal article on how hard the United States is going to work to keep the Javelin missiles from not falling in the hands of the Ukrainian rebels. I guess the United States is going to have U.S. soldiers around the weapons at all times. They're going to be locked up and kind of kept away from the front lines. It's amazing that the United States is this afraid of the weapons falling into rebel hands, why they would even give them the weapons in the first place. Also, I'm not sure what kind of use they're going to be if they're only going to be able to be used as defensive weapons and kept so far from the front lines. Also, there's the thing that if they're only used as defensive weapons, and that means, maybe you're retreating, and then some guy has one of these Javelin missiles, it does seem like a time where they would be likely to fall into the hands of the Ukrainian rebels if, you're already... So, it's stupid to send the weapons there. It's stupid because, we're afraid of them falling into rebel hands. And also, this is only going to provoke Russia to support the Ukrainian rebels. We have an Islamic State affiliate group in the Sinai of Egypt executing a Hamas fighter. I just want to point out, and I thought the significance of this is that the U.S. mainstream media and the Israel lobby always pretend like there's no difference from the Palestinians and the jihadists. And this simply isn't true, and it shows that the two groups don't get along either, since ISIS is chopping off the heads of Hamas just like they do white people. Wanted to talk a little bit about U.S. aid to Pakistan and the Palestinian Authority. The United States said that we're going to cut, I believe, most of the security aid going to Pakistan right now. While, as a libertarian, I'm never in favor of taking, money from poor people in America and giving it to rich people in Pakistan. Especially not to buy weapons that they're only going to use to suppress their own people. I don't like the geopolitics being played right now of moving away from Pakistan, moving towards India. This is going to put Pakistan in a position where they feel trapped and vulnerable. Of course, the Pakistanis have nuclear weapons and are developing tactical nuclear weapons, which are small yield nukes that would be used to target, maybe Indian military range and could provoke a larger nuclear war between the two countries. The aid cuts to the Palestinian Authority, similar feeling. I'm not for the United States giving away money to other countries. However, if we cut aid to the Palestinians, I would hope we cut some aid to Israel as well. General Votel, who is the commander of U.S. forces in the Middle East, said the United States is going to fight the Taliban more aggressively in Afghanistan. We have General Mattis, of course, Secretary of Defense, saying the war in Iraq and Syria isn't over, mostly laying out how the United States is going to fight the Islamic State. But for those of us, paying attention daily to what's been going on in Iraq and Syria, it seems much more likely that the United States forces are staying there as a counter to Iran and Hezbollah. In Afghanistan, we have the United States claiming they killed 86 Islamic State fighters. One U.S. Green Beret was killed and a couple more were pretty seriously injured. I'm not sure if they actually killed 86 Islamic State fighters. My guess would be that some of these people are probably civilians. I wasn't aware that the Islamic State in Afghanistan had gotten that large to, 86 I think would have been a pretty good percentage of the Islamic State fighters in Afghanistan not that long ago. They may have just been targeting any Tariqi Taliban in Afghanistan and then chalked them all up to Islamic State Khorasan group fighters. In Syria, we have Syrian rebels attacking an airbase that was apparently holding some Russian planes and destroyed some of them. The Russians are denying this happened, but I've seen some photographic proof that looks like the rebels did attack the base. It'll be interesting to see how the rebels were able to pull off this attack. We do know that in the past, some of the more successful rebels' attack on high-value targets within Syria have been directly funded by the Saudis. And a final little piece of good news I have for y'all is that Norway is ending weapon sales to the Emiratis over concerns that those weapons will be used in war crimes in Saudi Arabia. This is, I know it's slow moving, but every little domino that falls towards pointing out that Saudi Arabia is committing a genocide in Yemen. Steps taken like this on the international community are big steps, and I'm sure will force other European countries to evaluate their own positions selling their weapons to Saudi Arabia and the Emiratis. Alright, well that's where I'm going to wrap up the show for today. foreignpolicyfocus.libsyn.com, thelibertarianinstitute.org. The Facebook page is The Libertarian Union. I'm on Twitter at KYAAALE. My daily news roundup can also be found on my website, kylesfilesblog.com. There you can also sign up to get an email that I send out every day with the news roundup in it. So I hope you all are enjoying this, and I'll see you next time.